Joaquin El Chapo Guzman's desperate cry for help from Florence's high-security prison immerses the audience in the murky underworld of organized crime. It introduces us to an iconic character whose name has been forged in wealth and dyed in blood. Undisputed leader of the Sinaloa cartel and skilled escape artist who defied the laws, keeping two continents in suspense with his cunning and audacity. However, his reign of terror, like a movie twist, came to a dramatic and surprising end. Today, El Chapo Guzman lies in unforgiving isolation within one of the most secure and restricted prisons, the Florence prison. Imagine the radical change in the life of a man who used to live in the shadows, defying norms, and who now finds himself exposed to the despair of the total absence of human interactions. Locked in this abyss of rigidity, his story becomes a journey to discover the conditions that led the most wanted drug trafficker to ask for help. Delving into the truths behind this conflictive scenario involves a journey into the underworld of crime and punishment. In this environment, where the cunning of fugitives has no place and the hope of freedom is only a distant dream, understanding El Chapo's position becomes essential to understand the harsh conditions he faces daily behind the bars of ADX Florence. Meticulously fortified in the middle of the mountains, this prison is patrolled by heavily armed units and guarded by dozens of watchtowers rising atop brick buildings and walls topped with barbed wire. The extreme isolation is carefully designed to house inmates considered extremely dangerous, including some of the country's most notorious criminals. The measures taken at ADX Florence may seem extreme and shocking to some, although they satisfy others. For example, it involves virtually total isolation from other prisoners, spending most of their time in individual cells measuring approximately 7 by 12 feet. This absolute separation is implemented to avoid any contact between inmates and thus reduce the risk of violence. However, this extreme isolation can have serious consequences, such as cognitive deterioration and the decrease in social skills necessary for healthy coexistence. Imagining someone as controversial and well-known in the world of crime as El Chapo Guzman facing these conditions is even more shocking. Inmates at ADX Florence face severe restrictions on their communication with the outside world. Your telephone calls and correspondence are rigorously controlled and constantly monitored. Additionally, they have extremely limited access to visitors and, in many cases, are only allowed to interact with a small number of previously approved people. All of this occurs under strict supervision and surveillance, with inmates constantly watched by security personnel and surveillance cameras. Guards are highly trained to respond immediately to any sign of threat or inappropriate behavior. Inmates' movements are heavily restricted, and most of their daily activities take place within their own cells, forcing them to face the walls that separate them from the outside world. The prison is highly equipped with meticulously designed access control systems and contingency measures to prevent possible escape attempts or riots. It is crucial to note that during the first years of confinement at ADX Florence, extreme restrictions are placed on human contact. These restrictions are so severe that any individual would be forced to question comfort, a concept practically non-existent in this environment. Each cell provides the essentials: toilets, a couple of pieces of furniture, and a few other objects designed with safety in mind, without posing any risk. The daily routine of inmates depends on each individual. In the case of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, whose nature was not exactly peaceful, his calls for attention have been particularly notable, although they are limited to the available media. El Chapo claims to have suffered considerably within the walls of ADX Florence, raising significant questions regarding the will of governments and the rights of those imprisoned. This evidences a dispute over the humane treatment of those who have been marginalized in society due to their crimes. The opening of this debate about El Chapo Guzman's conditions at ADX Florence sheds light on crucial conflicts related to the treatment and rights of prisoners within the penal system. It is maintained that Guzman has been exposed to conditions considered inhumane, which represents a sudden change in the life of someone accustomed to luxury and a comfortable life. The claims cover aspects as serious as torture and attacks against all aspects of their health. In this case, the notion of justice is in a delicate balance, and El Chapo will do everything possible to take advantage of it. Strict rules, Rigid schedules and tight confined space conditions are just the beginning of their difficulties. Guzman's lawyers have pointed out that he speaks Spanish, while the staff in charge of his custody communicates exclusively in English, adding another small torment to his tolerance threshold. El Chapo claims that he is flatly denied access to programs in his native language and other forms of entertainment. His recreation time becomes a time when his only respite from the walls of his cell is to look at the sky. However, even in this short time, he is limited by a space not much larger than his own cell. The situation is such that inmates have adopted the habit of shouting through the ventilation shafts to be heard by their distant neighbors, highlighting the desperation they feel for normal human interactions. They are not even allowed to share a common dining room. Each of them eats individually in their cells, and this pattern is reflected in all their daily activities. Over time, inmates may acquire certain privileges and opportunities to socialize. However, these are considered as valuable as gold and are only granted in the last year of their stay, with the intention of encouraging more sociable and appropriate behavior for their eventual release. Considering El Chapo's prospects, escape from ADX Florence seems virtually impossible. Only a drug trafficking legend could do it. Analyzing the situation, it is evident that he prefers custody in Mexican prisons. Asking for help is your last resort. The prison environment in Mexico is perceived as more lenient, or rather, more humane. This would facilitate any move he wishes to undertake. Why did you call the Mexican authorities? In comparison, the regime at ADX Florence is exasperating. The former director of the prison described it as something worse than death. At ADX Florence, communication with the outside world becomes a distant dream for inmates. Calls and letters are under constant surveillance. Visitors are few and highly controlled. The inmates are practically buried alive, condemned to extreme loneliness. Around 400 prisoners, including less famous names like Theodore Kinski, inhabit this grim hell full of silent screams. They all share a common characteristic. They were forced to guarantee maximum security and isolation, which calls into question Guzman's statement about their conditions. Every mind in this place is prone to isolation and conspiracy, justifying custodial measures. Every movement is monitored, and inmates must wear visible restraints on their torso, hands, and feet, under constant supervision by guards and prison authorities. Guzman's message reached the Mexican president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who showed willingness to collaborate. However, his criminal history and notoriety make it unlikely that other entities will join the proposal. Chapo's past and actions have virtually sealed his chances of being heard regarding his grievances, contributing to his dehumanization and lack of empathy toward his case. El Chapo's presence at ADX Florence is a constant reminder of his crimes, denying him basic rights and violating his human rights. This long-hidden issue highlights the complexity of international cooperation to detain high-profile inmates. It is imperative to treat prisoners with humanity and justice, always respecting their fundamental rights. Addressing these issues is crucial for coexistence and solidarity behind bars, challenging the influence of renowned figures and questioning the transition from moral to economic conflicts. Power and wealth exert a powerful influence on our lives, leading people in high positions to sacrifice their ethical principles for economic gain or political influence. This shift in focus highlights the struggle between ethics, responsibility, and the lust for power and money. When high-ranking individuals are involved, this process highlights difficult ethical decisions and compromises, challenging our perceptions of power, morality, and justice. In an ever-changing world, ethics and responsibility are essential, especially when there are no personal interests at stake. The validation of privileged positions and corruption represent major obstacles to achieving true justice. Sharing opinions on this topic is essential to advancing our understanding of the nature of power, morality, and ethics in our society. Thank you for joining us in this video until the end. If you liked it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and activate the bell so you don't miss any video. Until the next case.